I'm Melanie Parker, Google's Chief Diversity Officer. Thank you for joining us for Equity Talks, part of our equity learner journey to more deeply examine and understand social injustice through dialogue.
Professor Hill, it's such a pleasure to have you here for this groundbreaking series. As you are well aware, educators such as yourself can have such a profound impact on one's career and life journey. I have one fond memory from Harvard Business School that I've carried with me literally throughout my entire career. Upon concluding a team project, Professor Roland Christensen wrote me a personal note which said, "You have great leadership potential. Don't ever settle for anything else. Your career will be sharing and successful." Let's take a moment to unpack some of these words which are so important for an African American woman, particularly a leader, to hear around leadership, potential, don't settle. Given your studies on this topic, can you share with us your philosophy around leadership, particularly for leaders of color?
Yes, I'd be glad to do that. And it's a privilege to be here with you. And I must say that the professor who wrote you that note is one of the most esteemed professors ever in the history of Harvard Business School. So you should cherish it. I really try very hard in doing my work to help people learn how to lead, because we know that with leadership comes not only rights and privileges, but also duties and obligations. So it matters that we all lead properly. So it makes a difference whether or not you're a great leader or not. Being good is not good enough. You need to be great because people are counting on you. So that is the first lesson that I try to help all the people I work with understand, that there really are responsibilities and duties that come with leadership. The second thing I try to do is help people understand that they need to always be prepared to be lifelong learners. You can only learn what you get to do. So if you want to be successful as a leader, you need to make sure you get the right kinds of opportunities. And those opportunities are what I refer to as stretch assignments. Assignments where you get to work on that which is really relevant to the organization today or tomorrow, where you have a chance to display some autonomy and some of your leadership, and where there's some visibility that people will actually know that you did it, so you will get credit for it. And the reason why credit matters is that people need to understand that you are credible. And to be credible, people need to trust you. They need to trust your character, your competence, and they need to know you can have influence. So what we know happens to people who are in the minority in an organization is that it is, so what we know happens to people who are in a minority in an organization is that it is harder for them to get access to those stretch assignments. Because what you know is based on what you get to do, but what you get to do is based on who you know. And no one is going to give you a stretch assignment, an assignment where, where the work is relevant and you have a lot of autonomy and visibility, if they don't trust you, if they don't trust your character and your competence. And we know that people need more evidence to trust those who are in the minority before they give them those kinds of assignments. So what you see with people who are Black, for instance, is they're much more likely to be de-skilled over time because they're not getting access to those assignments because people don't trust them enough to give them those assignments. So the professor was telling you, make sure you get those assignments, be proactive and insist upon getting those assignments, because you know what? It's going to be harder for you.
May I call you Linda?
Yes, please do.
I feel like we're getting to know each other right here, and we've had, obviously some contact in the past, and you've written two major books, Being the Boss, which I've actually shared with my team, many of the phrases from there, as well as Collective Genius, which is so important to us in the tech industry around innovation. You've also done case studies with women protagonists. You've done some international work, including Japan as well as South Africa, and you've done some extensive work as an anthropologist. It's again, such a pleasure to hear some of your pearls of wisdom around the leadership area. So thank you again for being here.
Well, it's a pleasure. So my own work is really on leadership, globalization, and innovation. So I try to look at all three of those things at once and try to develop very simple models for helping people think about how they're going to deal with all of the challenges and opportunities we face today. So the other piece of leadership that I try to help people understand that is particularly important for those who are in the minority is there are really three imperatives for being a great leader. One is managing yourself and understanding how to use yourself as an instrument to get things done. The second is managing your network, managing relationships with all those individuals and groups over whom you have no formal authority, but you're deeply dependent on to get your job done. And finally, managing your team, or those people who actually report to you. If you don't take care of all three of those, you will not be a great leader. And for sure, we know that women and people of color find that networking piece to be a particularly tricky one for them. And many of them will often say to me, that's not my job. I shouldn't have to do that. But that is your job, and that is leadership. And it's about making sure that you have power, because without power, you can't make sure that your team has the resources your team needs. You can't make sure that you get access to those assignments we talked about that you need to have. And also, you basically can't give voice to your values because you're powerless. Benita, you've also written a book, and you wrote a book with another Harvard MBA, Jackie Adams. And in that book, you elaborate on what it really means to be an effective leader from your context and what you've seen in studying women over many generations. And I'd like for you to share with me some of what you've learned.
Yes, Linda, we have written a book. It's coming out on October 15th. It's called A Blessing, Women of Color Teaming Up to Lead, Empower, and Thrive. The title, A Blessing, though, requires a bit of explanation. We found in our careers, women of color, we've often been the first, like yourself. You were the first African-American woman tenured professor at the Harvard Business School. Myself, I was the first African-American vice president at Google, and my co-author, who was the first African-American woman to serve as a CBS White House correspondent. And so given that we are first, we have often been called unicorns. And unicorns, we know, are they're the rare and valuable beings. When you think of a flock of geese or a parade of giraffe, a group of unicorns is called a blessing. And so here we are. The other thing that we've done, and you actually commented about this, is the fact that we wanted to be data-driven. So it is a combination. We have some anecdotal stories from other Harvard Business School alumni, but we also wanted to make sure that we were grounded in data. So we surveyed 4,005 women, categorized as desk workers across 4 races. That's Black, Latinx, Asian, as well as white. And here's the thing, we went across 4 generations. So we started with Gen Z, as well as millennials, Gen X, and boomers. And in the book itself, we cover 4 central themes. And given our experience being a group of unicorns at the Harvard Business School, we decided to look at 4 central areas. The first one, we've coined a new phrase, which is generational diversity. We hear a lot about D&I, but we never hear about the slices of D&I. And so we wanted to actually take a new view in terms of looking at the generations. The second thing that we looked at, and we're hearing more about today, whether it's in the corporations or in the boardrooms, or even entrepreneurs are talking about this in the VC world, is around inclusive leadership. And then third is allyship. And that's something we think needs to be nurtured. As we looked back on our own success, we found that we did not do it alone. There were those that came in to support us. And then lastly, we wanted to bring a new narrative to the conversation, particularly for women of color, is the fact that we can team up, and instead of being alone and instead of being the only, or being what we call the soul sister, SOLE, why can't we come together and be more supportive of one another? And there were a couple of things that we found in the survey. We found that 47% of Black women said that they are frequently or always the only person of their race in professional situations. And this compares to 73% of white women who are rarely the only one of their race in those situations. There's clearly more to explore in the book, but I will highlight 2 areas that we found eye-opening around the younger generation in the areas of inclusive leadership as well as the role of sisterhood. So across the board, particularly in Gen Z, 92% of Black women, 93% of Latinx women, 96% of Asian women, and 95% of white women feel that guidance from managers and supervisors will be helpful to making progress at work. So that's across the board. That's everyone. And then we also found that younger women, though, in Gen Z, actually want a supportive work environment. They want a sense of belonging. We're hearing that word more commonly, in the hallways now. They want a connection with their supervisors, but they also want the sisterhood. And in that area, we found 92% of Black women and 90% of Latinx women felt sisterhood would be important to them at work. And interestingly, the percentage were much smaller with the other groups. So only 84% of white women and 83% of Asian women felt the same way about sisterhood. And when we see this, we know that if you're part of an underrepresented group, you can't do it alone. So we actually did a full chapter on the power and importance of allyship. So I wanted to set the stage in terms of some of the areas that we explored, the fact that we know it varies by generation. But Linda, you have also seen this vast evolution across leadership. And we've seen numbers that have showed us just the acceleration of business models around digital transformation that has just taken within the past 3 months. How are you seeing the evolution of allyship right now, and how is it evolving? And what are you studying? What are you hearing from your students as well as from companies?
So I must say, when I read your book, and it was really a privilege that I got to read it early, I was almost moved to tears, because I don't really think all that often about my being alone. But in fact, you're right. In some ways, I am alone. And I've been alone a lot of times because I'm an Army brat, and we used to move sort of every 2 years of my life, and I'd end up in new places. And I'm frankly very introverted and like to be behind the scenes. So that loneliness, or that being aloneness, is something that I kind of grew up with. Maybe that's why I don't have as much difficulty sometimes dealing with it now in my life, because I'm frequently the only one, actually maybe most of the time. So I think that is one of the reasons why I have very deeply appreciated my relationships with my students. And not just the Black students, but all students. And I really have relationships with students for many years now, because I've been professor for a long time. So I've seen these generations come through the business school that you're talking about. And so I haven't felt so alone, in part because I have had you and your fellow colleagues as students. Of course, you're in a different status than I am as a professor, but I'm aware of you, and it has always meant so much to me to have you around. And the few times I've been with all Black groups, it's just touched me. I remember the first time I went to Africa. So what you write about in your book about being an only and the stresses of that, truly, they're real. They're very real. And I must say, my own life kind of prepared me a bit for it, because I kind of was lonely or alone a lot anyway as an individual, because of the way we moved a lot when I was a child. But what I wanted to say in terms of allyship is the following. The allies come from everywhere, which is why I mentioned my students. And frankly, I've been on the boards of some of my students, and some of my students are going to be on boards. And actually, my current boss is a former student, a Black woman, and a white woman from Harvard Business School. And that has been where I have reached out to find others who can help me. So when you think about allies, I want all of us to think about it broadly. Going back to what I said earlier about this de-skilling process if people don't trust you. You need lots of people to trust you, and you need lots of different kinds of experiences. So what I always try to help all students understand, particularly my Black students, is you need to always have your own personal board of directors. We're social learners, we're social animals. You need people to give you access to opportunity. You need people to help coach you when you're taking advantage of that opportunity, to tell you when you've made a mistake or a misstep, to just tell you you're not crazy when you run into a lot of resistance to what you're trying to do. So we always need to think about, how do I build that personal board of directors? And we need to have in that personal board people who are of our same demographic profile and people who are different, because the world is quite diverse. Now, the other part of it that I really want to bring up now, and just builds on what you were talking about, is that what we have to understand is there are two myths that people tend to hold that really hold all of us back, and why we need to team up. The first one is that stars are born, not made. The reality is stars are made, not born. Going back to what I said to you, what you know is based on what you get to do, and what you get to do is based on what people give you the opportunity to do, or you can tell them I'm ready to have that opportunity. So the first thing is we are going to be made. So how do we participate and take charge of our development so that we can be made, particularly when there's so many barriers against us because we're the only, and people aren't necessarily going to trust us. What role was I trusted to have as a 7th grader in the play? The role of the maid. It was the only role I was trusted for. So guess what? I got that stretch assignment. So again, we have to work against and make sure that people see we have other kinds of capabilities. My mother was always the one at the school every day, right, if necessary, to make sure the teacher understood, please take care of Linda. Linda's capable and she should get it done. Now, what I didn't know is my mother didn't tell me that I flunked kindergarten. I flunked kindergarten. She told me that once when she was at the Harvard Business School attending one of my classes when I was 40. I guess she didn't want me to lose confidence. So for sure, she knew I was going to be alone, but I wasn't really because my mother was there. My mother was there to make sure those teachers taught me and really understood what capability I have. Now, my former students were there for me when I was in the classroom and also now when I'm now still trying to develop my career and I have lots more I want to do. The other myth that we really have to confront, and I think you confronted in your book very beautifully, and the younger generation is not going to put up with it as much as my generation did, and that is that it is really hard to build meritocracies. We should all aspire to live in a meritocracy. But you know what? The reality is, even when you don't have demographic diversity, we don't really see those many meritocracies. And I know that from working in global companies. I spend as much time in my clients and my research, about 60% is outside the US. And for sure, this is true everywhere. Again, it goes back to that trust issue. Unless people trust you, they don't give you opportunity that will allow you to know what you need to know to move up in the organization. So what the younger generations is saying to us in your book, and what I see at the Harvard Business School is, I don't really want to say they're impatient because they're not, maybe I was too patient. But I think what they're saying is, if you want me in your organization, I have to feel like I belong and I'm going to have that opportunity. And yes, I know it's hard to build meritocracies because of this trust factor, but guess what? You need to work hard to get to know me so you know the right evidence to pay attention to, so that you know that I am worth taking a risk on, and I need to figure out how I get to know you, which is again why we need allies that really from all, if you have many different demographic groups in the organization, you need to have all of those people be your allies, including people from different generations.
Linda, it's interesting that you mentioned that. One of the things that came to mind in the book was we found that Black women as well as Latinx women over-indexed in terms of being the first to know around technology, and what we used to call in our family, making a way out of no way. Like there's elements of innovation when you are deprived that you come up with. And you wrote in Collective Genius just about innovation, but can you compare that or relay that to just how that can drive equity and inclusion and the concepts that you had around being a value creator and being a game changer? I think the audience would love to hear how the description of those two, in addition to some of the opportunity gaps, as well as performance gaps, and how that ties into just an overall stretch assignment. Because quite frankly, in business, you have to drive innovation in a way that separates you. And so I think this would be interesting for us to discuss.
Yes, and I want to tell you that part of it is, of course, my work is based on research. I am an academic, and as you said, I use the methods of anthropology to do my work. So interestingly enough, the two cases I wrote when I first came to the Harvard Business School were about women. The first one being about an African-American woman. Her name was Suzanne DePass, and she was the head of Motown Productions. And I bring her up because Suzanne taught me a whole lot about leadership years ago when she was working on sort of Motown 25, working on Lonesome Dove, different television shows that probably some people here weren't born when they were developed, but maybe watched. And there was also a show about twin sisters. I can't recall. I think it was Sister. So I followed her for many years, and she told me that leadership was about creating the kind of environment in which people could do their very best work. And I learned about that from Suzanne when I looked at her as she was producing. Now, interestingly enough, when I went to understand innovation, what I tried to do was look at leaders in a whole range of contexts, because it turns out that although there's a lot of research on leadership and there's a lot of research on innovation, there's not very much research that looks at the connection between the two. And that is what my collaborators and I have studied together. And the way we've gone about doing that is really looking at leaders on the ground as they're working with their colleagues, trying to innovate. And the way I define an exceptional leader of innovation is someone who's built an organization or a team that can routinely innovate, not just once, but time and time again. And so when we went around the world studying leaders in about 20 countries, and maybe depending on how you want to count industries, I'd say about probably 21 industries, we saw that there were differences in how they went about doing their work, but really striking similarities in what they did and why. And so the first thing, and I'll use a leader from who was the co-founder of Pixar, Ed Catmull, who I've gotten to know very well. What they say at Pixar is that the role of the leader is to unleash the slice of genius of every individual in the organization and figure out how to leverage that slice of genius to get something done that the organization needs done. Now, there are two kinds of things the organization might need to get done. One is what's referred to as a performance gap, a gap between where you are now and where you should be. And the other is called an opportunity gap, a gap between where you are now and where you could be. So could versus should. I mean, what you see in these organizations where you see lots of innovation is everyone in the organization has said, take your slice of genius, your talents, your passions, and figure out not only how to address these shoulds, but also these coulds. We're very ambitious. We're really purpose-driven. So if you want to think about stretch assignments as being coulds a little bit more than shoulds, it's not quite the way it works, but you want to always be thinking about, how do I stretch? How do I do even more for my customer? What's that thing that would truly delight and differentiate what we're doing at Google for our customers? That's what you want to work on, because when you try to do those kinds of stretch assignments, that is when you get tested. That is when you develop the capacity to learn how to work with others and lead them and collaborate with them to create a new future for your customer. So what leading innovation is about is leading innovation is not about getting people to follow you to the future. It's about getting people to co-create the future with you. So what we all need to figure out how to do is, how do we collaborate with diverse others to get that done? You rarely see innovation without the collaboration of people with diverse perspectives and diverse expertise. Now, diversity of thought is not the same as demographic diversity, as we well know, because we know in Silicon Valley, for instance, even though there's a fair amount of innovation, we don't see a lot of demographic diversity. So it's not required, right? However, we all know that our lived experiences do help us think differently and behave differently. So when an organization doesn't have that demographic diversity, they're probably cutting off something that they really need. That's really a business priority. So what I would say is that what companies need to understand is, if you're going to get ahead and stay ahead, you're going to have to be agile and you're going to have to be able to innovate. And you need to have everyone in the organization being prepared to do that. And frankly, you need, in particular, people with diverse points of view, diverse talents to get it done. And so what we see about leaders who lead innovation really well is they are very comfortable amplifying diversity, not simply minimizing it, because they're not afraid of conflict. They understand that conflict can be good and constructive if you know how to manage that conflict. So one of the things I would say to anyone who wants to be a leader today or tomorrow is, you need to get good at managing conflict. You need to get good at not only attracting diverse talent, but when people are passionate and they're diverse, guess what? Sparks will fly, and you've got to figure out how to leverage and harness all of that talent to get done what you need to get done for your customer or your various stakeholders. And I will tell you, the issue of what we talk about in terms of being able to deal with conflict, we refer to it, and it's referred to in the innovation literature as creative abrasion. And the person who taught me a lot about that was actually a man who was in the cell block across from Nelson Mandela. And one day he surprised me, literally surprised me, and arranged for me to be with Nelson Mandela for a whole day. One of the things that President Mandela, I should call, one of the things that President Mandela said, I should say, it's hard for me to believe he's not with us anymore, is that one of the most important roles of a leader is to make sure that the contrarian voice is heard, that the minority voice is heard. And in today's environment, if you don't know how to hear that voice, you're not going to de-risk whatever you're working on. and you're not going to stretch yourself in the way you need to or your organization needs to if you're going to thrive.
So maybe I'll talk a little bit about, we know that racial justice is top of mind for many people within the US, but also the world right now. And in terms of looking at the present moment, Linda, some of the things that you've mentioned regarding just the ambition, I think that's something that we need to harness, because every day we see women of color knocking down barriers in every profession, whether it's politics or in the boardroom right now. The ambition is abundant. But we do think, and I agree with you, and we've also quoted you as well as President Mandela in our book around leading from all sides. But one of the things that we talk to leaders about in the book is to just get started. That there are so many actionable steps that they can take. We do think that we should hire in multiple. So we tell leaders that don't just get an only and think of it as I'm one and done. If you really truly want that diversity of thought, you need to look at the representation and hire in multiples. And then secondly, I also agree with you in the fact that you have to ask questions and you have to get comfortable actually being uncomfortable. And so it will take even ratcheting up your lifelong learning to soak in the knowledge of just the, and in fact, Harvard Business School has a case on inequality within the US, but having a better understanding of the situation is so important. And I would say, lastly, is looking beyond for potential and not perfection, or what you discussed earlier, not a homogeneous situation. You won't have innovation if you have that type of environment. Are there things that we should be doing, Linda, at Google in terms of really maintaining or creating more momentum in this area?
Yes, and I was actually going to ask you about that as well. And I think, as you said, there are many points that you make in your own writing and in your own life that demonstrate your desire to make sure we get moving and get things done. I agree with you completely that we all need to take some responsibility. That's what leadership is about. As I said, it's not just privileges or rights, it's duties and obligations to make sure that we build inclusive organizations and an inclusive society. By inclusion, I mean we actually value difference and we promote equal opportunity to those assignments, etc. So I thought of President Mandela because one of the things that I was asked to do, and I want to talk about what Google can do, is here I am, I'm an organizational person, right? I meet Ahmed Kathrada, who's been in prison for 27 years with President Mandela, and he says, would you help us with Black economic empowerment? And my first thought was, I'm an organizational theorist. I'm not a political scientist. I don't know how to help you as a country think about Black economic empowerment. But you know what? What I've come to understand is that we all have platforms. And Google is a platform, a very important platform in this world. And so I think one thing that Google can do, and what you might want to think about in terms of momentum, is that you do have this platform, hence this series and other things you can be doing, because people will listen to you. People know who you are. We all need to step up and say, okay, we have some power, we have some influence. How do we use it to move the organization forward? So I think for Google, one is we do all have to get our own house in order. And that's true at the Harvard Business School as well. We have to be very transparent about what do our numbers actually look like. And we have to look at them with rigor. We can't lump together groups that sort of hide and make us look better than we might look. And we need to hold ourselves accountable in a social way, because once you tell people this is our truth and you do a diagnosis of why those numbers look the way they do, then you're going to have to ask yourself, and this is something I've been asking senior executives who ask me to come speak to them about these matters. I always ask them, what are you willing to do differently? Just be honest with yourself. What are you willing to do differently? And if you're not willing to do very much differently, then you need to not go down this path, because guess what? We're all going to have to do things a little differently or a lot differently to truly make this a place where everyone gets opportunity. So one thing I would say at Google is you really want to pay attention to what evidence do you rely on to decide that someone does have potential. We all only learn when we're stretched. You're always taking a risk on people. So collectively agreeing on what are the right criteria, what is the evidence we really need to have to know that someone might be ready to take, if you will, that leap. And the other thing I would say is very much like you said it, the numbers do matter. It is very lonely to be alone, frankly. And, you know, it's interesting. There's a program called the Posse program. Are you familiar with that by any means?
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful program.
It's a wonderful program. The Posse program, and maybe at Google, you can have your own posses, if you will. If you think about it, you bring in cohorts. And the Posse program was a program that was started to try to help people, actually not people of color. It was to help people who actually were initially people who were the first to go to college in their family. So it was based on that notion that when this is a whole new world for you. If you've never gone to college, you're not getting the support at home. So they finally kind of figured out that people who would get into college because they really were very smart, very resilient, all of that, but they weren't graduating. So finally what Posse realized was, let's take all the kids from a particular city who are going to a college and let's make the college take 4 of them, not just 1 of them. And if they come with their posse, people who've actually had rather similar life experiences to them, then they're more likely to have those supports, that sisterhood, if you will, to get them moving forward. And so I went to Bryn Mawr College, and it took a while to convince people, we don't want to have to take 4. We pick 1 by 1. Well, you know what? You can't find 4 very capable people from the whole city of Boston who, you know, first timers. And it turns out they usually were very mixed groups in terms of color, frankly. And it's a women's college, so I think of that. And I used to have them at my home before they went off to Bryn Mawr, just to see what their experiences were. But that idea of a posse is something that, you know, Google and other places might think about, or the Harvard Business School. You take groups of people because they need those supports. And so that, again, seemed very risky and not appropriate, et cetera. But once the college did that, and many other colleges that have adopted that approach, not only have they graduated, but I think it's Bowdoin College, where almost every president of the student body has been actually someone from Posse, because they have learned a lot of leadership. They prepare them. They don't just send them, if you will, to the Googles or the Harvard Business Schools. They actually go through training, leadership training, how to collaborate together, how to team up, frankly, before they go. And also how to deal with the so-called microaggressions. I think that's a very interesting word. They're taught about how to kind of deal with what they're going to encounter because people aren't familiar with who they are. Posse was first started around socioeconomic status, but we know that socioeconomic status and race and ethnicity are also, they intersect as well. So a lot of the young students who went into Posse were actually people of color.
So one of the things we talk about in our book is just around empowerment. So whether you're empowering yourself or you're empowering others, how do you think about just minority voices, and how can they become more powerful versus being powerless? I mean, how would we actually do that? From your perspective.
And I'd love to hear some of the things you are doing at Google to help with all of this, because I know, or not just at Google, but that you've done personally to help with all of this, making sure that people feel powerful and empowered. So I always talk about powerlessness being corrupting. And it is corrupting because you can't give voice to your values when you feel like you don't have power. And I see a large part of my role as a business professor is to help people feel powerful, because if everyone feels powerful, no one can take advantage of us. We're all going to have to work together. So I think one of the things we need to do is help people learn what it does take to be influential, which is why a lot of the work I do nowadays is on horizontal leadership, that networking piece. Because again, that's where a lot of the power comes from. Frankly, in an organization like Google or any organization that really wants to thrive, where you have to innovate, really relying on top-down leadership, that just stifles creativity, stifles innovation. It really is more horizontal work, and we need to kind of adopt those sorts of models. So I think the first thing that I always think in most organizations, it takes a while for it to trickle down, but people of color benefit from better leadership all the way around, better collaboration all the way around, everyone in the organization understanding, as you said earlier, we need to ask questions and inquire perhaps more than we actually advocate, so that we do unleash those different slices of genius in the organization. And frankly, if you don't think someone has a slice of genius, they're going to destroy the community feeling and the trust that you need in the organization. You should give them the feedback to let them go somewhere else where they can be respected and actually used, because I believe everybody has something to offer. All slices aren't equal, they're different, etc., but everybody should be able to find a place where they can belong and contribute and have impact. What matters is impact, right? So I think what I'd say, if you're a leader, as you are, you're a very important leader at Google, how do you help people learn to have impact? But impact on those opportunity gaps, those performance gaps that actually speak to their own passions, because people expect there to be an alignment between what they care about and what they get to do and the kinds of organizations they're associated with. So you as a leader are going to have to find your way, as my colleague Boris Kreuzberg says, that leadership is about two-way conversation, two-way development. And so I think when you develop that more two-way co-creation kind of model, with whomever you're dealing with, you're always going to be very pleasantly surprised by what they know, what they have to offer, how they can stretch you in return. I think that kind of mindset actually will lead you to be a better person and learn more, and will also help them. Because what we do know is there's a real link between curiosity, leadership, and innovation. You should be curious about other people. Vanita, I hope you'd share with me and with others some of the many things you've done to actually help women of color fulfill their ambitions and lead the kinds of lives they'd like to.
I think one of the things is just serving as a role model, but you realize that coaching and mentoring and sponsoring. And so I like to say I am a hidden figure because I'm working behind the scenes, making sure if I see something, I say something, and I do something. And I think that is something that's important. One of the things that the concept that we brought in the book is around teaming up. And we think it's something that I've practiced in the past, but to actually think of it, what if everyone actually took on this concept? So it's very simple, it's very powerful, and we think it's best if we do team up. You talked about the posse. Everybody loves a cohort, and no one really should go through their career alone. So when I see anyone that is alone, and that's one of the reasons why I took a group of African-American women to the ballet, so that we could actually see Misty Copeland, because I did not want her to be in that theater, and this was in her early days, alone. I wanted her to be able to look out in the audience, and we had the opportunity to go backstage and see her, but I wanted her to look out and know she was not alone, that we were with her. We were teaming up with her on her path to become the first Black ballerina principal, at American Ballet Theater. And so there's so much ambition. And actually right now, as with Kamala Harris, they're talking about there will be resistance to your ambition. And we know that teaming up could actually be the antidote to this. One of the things that we studied, and you'll enjoy this from your travel in South Africa, but one of our favorite metaphors for this is the symbiotic relationship of zebras and ostriches, because we did study the generations. And so we wanted to create a framework around this. And zebras can actually sense predators. So when you think about boomers, and we know, we've been there, we've been only, we can sense the predators, but the ostriches actually have keen vision. And so those are the ones that can actually see beyond the corner. And so the zebras and the ostriches actually travel together so that they can protect each other and keep themselves out of harm's way. And so we do think that it's important, particularly for women of color, to travel together and to see how the generations can team up, because we do believe that there's opportunity so that we can help each other. We want everyone to reach their fullest potential. We want to make sure that you know how to empower yourself and to have that level of confidence, as well as empowering others. And then we did study self-care, because with all the stresses of life and business, you do need to thrive. And so we actually spend some time talking about that. The other thing is the fact that even throughout my career, I knew I needed others. And so this book is also not just for women of color. This book is for leaders everywhere. And we're speaking to the leaders, the ones that you've talked about, that will be the innovators. Because if they are the innovators, talent will be the next competitive advantage. We're going through, there will be reskilling, there will be transformations that will happen, whether it's from a digital perspective or a full end-to-end business transformation. And so in order to do that, you're going to have to tap into talent. And so this book is for those leaders that actually want to win this race for talent. And for those that actually believe it can be a competitive advantage, we want to show them the way that there's this whole bevy of women of color that are ready for a stretch assignment and more. And so we're saying to the leaders, tap in, tap often, and tap for the many. And that's what we are thinking about, in terms of just teaming up. And I think, Linda, what you've shared with us today has been also just incredible insight in the fact that you've been studying this for so long, and you're also pushing that stretch assignment. And how people and leaders particularly can think about their organizations in new and different ways, but also to be able to think about innovation, because that will also be the differentiator. And I think we're all companies are seeing that today. Brands are seeing it. Boardrooms are experiencing it. But when you start to layer in the opportunity, the talent opportunity of D&I and really taking it beyond the words, I think there will be a tremendous ROI.
One thing I wanted to say, when we're talking about teaming up, we really are talking about teaming up in the broadest sense of women of color. So I did want to end with one story. So I have a former student, different generation, Yumi Kawana, Japanese American, but she spent most of her life in Japan. And Yumi came to me a number of years ago and said she wanted to figure out, how do we really develop people who can be global citizens, who understand the kinds of opportunities and challenges we'll have in being a global place, taking seriously the interdependence. So Yumi was in my class a long time ago. And one of the things that's happened is she did create this organization called Global Citizens Initiative, which is fabulous, asked me to be on the board of it. She ended up in Forbes magazine as one of the most powerful Japanese women in the world, standing in a very, really this lovely stance they like to put you in. But I think it's because of Yumi, although I've not been able to trace it, that I actually got an invitation to come have dinner and lunch with the Prime Minister of Japan. So you never know where these connections, I really want to talk about not only across generation, but across our ethnicities and race. So I found myself going to Japan to do this, to talk to the Prime Minister about diversity and inclusion. And the reason why I gather, and I'm not sure if she was the source, but I think she could have had something to do with it. The reason he wanted to speak with me, or why I got included, I should say, as staff, I'm sure that's how this all happens, was because of the focus on innovation. That when the staff heard about, well, if you want to innovate, you have to have more diversity. And also in Japan, as they well are aware, if they don't get more women engaged in the economy, they can't grow the economy. So to be having what was seen as an opportunity, diversity isn't a problem to be solved. It's an opportunity to really be fulfilled, to take advantage of. And I must say, when I found myself there, meeting with the Prime Minister, and actually Caroline Kennedy was there because it was when she was the ambassador, and understanding that this probably came about because of a student I had a while ago at Harvard Business School, it really reminds us that teaming up really is about bringing us all together and have that diversity in our own personal board of directors that cuts across race, ethnicity, and also generation. Because that is true, that our strength is in our collective. And I didn't write a book about collective genius with my co-authors. I called the book Collective Genius. And when I first came up with that title, this guy had co-authors, but that was the title I wanted. Many people objected to it. Oh, collective. This is hard to believe now because we see collective intelligence, collective that. But the power of the collective, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So it's not just about the numbers. It's about really appreciating the slice of genius that each of us brings because of our different backgrounds and bringing those together to come up with a new future, not the future of the past, but a future we can't even really see what it's going to be yet. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you, Anita. Again, it's why I love being a professor at Harvard Business School. Again, you created opportunity for me here, and I deeply, deeply appreciate it.
Learn about Google's Equity Learner Journey on diversity.google.com and sign up to learn about new episodes.